single day, like I've always done and always will.
Passing these bills on the floor, making yet another stand.
Welcome to this week's edition of New York Now. I'm Chantel Destra. New York City Mayor Eric Adams has been criminally charged following a federal corruption investigation. The 57-page indictment comes after months of speculation and the federal raids of top city officials throughout the summer. The FBI seized the phones of Adams last fall, and this week the mayor's own residence was also searched. The charges include conspiracy, fraud, bribery, and soliciting foreign campaign contributions. Prosecutors allege that the mayor granted favors to Turkish officials in exchange for luxury travels and donations for the last 10 years. In addition, the mayor is also accused of exploiting campaign finance law, where he receives millions of dollars in public funds.
Mayor Adams engaged in a long-running conspiracy in which he solicited and knowingly accepted illegal campaign contributions from foreign donors and corporations. As we allege, Mayor Adams took these contributions even though he knew they were illegal, and even though he knew these contributions were attempts by a Turkish government official and Turkish businessmen to buy influence with him.
At a press conference, Adams vowed to fight against the charges and said he will not step aside as mayor.
This did not surprise us that we reached this day. And I ask New Yorkers to wait to hear our defense before making any judgments.
Since the news of the charges, several New York elected officials have called on Adams to resign. As this is an ongoing investigation, we'll continue to bring you updates right here on the show. Now turning to another important topic. On October 1st, the state will move to transition New Yorkers enrolled in the Consumer-Directed Personal Assistance Program to use one single fiscal intermediary. The move, which is a result of the state budget, has led to criticism from patients and several lawmakers. State Senator Gustavo Rivera, who chairs the Health Committee, recently introduced a bill meant to both stop the transition and improve the program. We sat down with the senator to discuss the work to garner support. Here's that conversation. Thank you so much for joining us today, Senator.
Pleasure to be with you.
Now, under new rules, the state will eliminate fiscal middlemen and use one vendor to handle patients currently enrolled in the Consumer-Directed Personal Assistance Program. Now, you've introduced a bill that would essentially stop that move. So can you tell us more about the bill and its impact?
Yeah, so to start up, let's back up for a second. What we're talking about here is known as a CDPAP program that stands for Consumer-Directed Personal Assistance Program. This is the situation in which somebody might have a physical disability, is elderly, etc., but still has the capacity to communicate what their wishes are. So then that person can direct their care. They can choose someone to take care of them, whether it's a family member or not, somebody else to take care of them, and that person that's paid through a Medicaid. And to make this happen, there's something called a fiscal intermediary, or FI, which actually handles paperwork, makes sure that the money that comes from the state actually gets to that person, and then the patient gets their care. And to start with, I agree that with the idea that we need to change the program, that we need to alter the program, because unfortunately, the way it is currently structured, there are a lot of bad actors that are taking advantage of the way that the program is currently structured, and are caring more about just putting money in their pockets and not necessarily running the program well or making sure that the money gets to the people that it needs to get to. However, I do not believe that the governor's proposal to go from what is now hundreds of fiscal intermediaries to one in the state is the right or the correct or the reasonable way to go about this. And my bill, which I'm sure we'll talk about at length, is a reasonable alternative here. To change the system, yes, to make it tighter so that bad actors can't operate in it, but not to go from a lot of fiscal intermediaries to just one and in a short time frame. I don't think it's realistic.
And I remember watching your remarks on the Senate floor in regards to the changes to the CDPAP program, where you did not seem particularly happy or in support of the changes. So can you help us understand what's been going through your mind since budget negotiations up until this point?
Well, as you pointed out, yes, this is something that goes all the way back to our budget earlier this year. And during that debate, what I expressed openly and publicly many times was that unfortunately this was the agreement that we had to come to because the governor wanted this to be the way that we go forward. And when I say this, is the change to one fiscal intermediary in the entire state. I did not believe then that it was the right way to go. And so what we did, what my staff and I did, is over months, we spoke to patients, to stakeholders, to fiscal intermediaries, some of the good actors, et cetera, and we came up with what I believe is a reasonable solution. Now, ultimately, what this bill would do is to create a series of licensing. It would establish criteria for licensing so that the Department of Health would review that would allow the state to weed out bad actors, and it would provide opportunities for good actors to continue to operate. And overall, it would maintain some stability in the system, because that's what we have to think about. The reason why the CDPAP program exists is because these folks to get taken care of by their personal assistants, these are folks who are not in hospital rooms, they're not in nursing homes, they're not in emergency rooms. So not only does it make their life better and their community, because they stay in their communities being taken care of by somebody that they know and trust, but also they save the state money. So as opposed to going to one fiscal intermediary in a very short period of time, what my bill proposes is a timeline of a year, and it will set again all sorts of criteria for licensing that would weed out the bad actors.
And as chair of the Senate Health Committee, what was some of the firsthand responses that you received from advocates and patients in regards to the changes to the program, as well as the introduction of your bill?
Well, we've worked with some stakeholders for months to get the bill right, and the public comments on this have been very positive, particularly the folks. Again, this is an essential program. We have patients all over the state that are relying on this program to be able to take care of themselves and their daily needs. And they responded positively, saying that they believe that my approach is a more reasonable one than the one the governor proposes. So I feel strongly that this is ultimately a much better approach. And what I would hope happens is, like, we've introduced it into the public eye, right? It is now in public discussion, so to speak. The governor insists that they want to go forward with this, and they have the administration says that, we're too far into this process. We have to go through with it. I'll remind everyone that just earlier this year, the congestion pricing, which was something that was supposed to go into effect and was something that was far more consequential than this, related to billions of dollars. Well, the governor pulled the plug on that in the last minute without any plan to replace it. We're not saying that. We're saying we have a plan that is a reasonable way to go about fixing this program, and we have a timeline to do it. So yes, you can indeed stop what you're doing right now. You can stop what has been planned already, because we have a reasonable plan in front of us. And that's what I hope will happen. So we are going to continue pushing here through next year. Obviously, the legislative session is not with us yet, but there will be changes that we can make next year during the legislative session and during budget next year. I'm hoping that this introduction of this bill just continues a public discussion about how we can better change the program and alter it to make it continue its effectiveness, to make it an effective program, to run it better, but to continue its existence.
And as you mentioned, one of the issues with the current program that the governor highlighted has to deal with fraud. So can you tell us more about how your bill will sort of put guardrails in place to protect against fraud?
Absolutely. Well, first of all, it establishes criteria that for the Department of Health that is much stricter than the one that exists now, that would allow the state to weed out bad actors in the licensure process. It establishes training requirements for personal assistants in order to ensure baseline of competency. It restores something that doesn't exist right now, which is control or oversight into contracting, that allows for review of fiscal intermediary activities, and also requires far more detailed reporting from these entities. So I think that this is kind of all of these things together whether we're establishing higher criteria, giving more power to the Department of Health, allowing the controller to have fiscal oversight over them. All of these things together would actually make it so that bad actors can be weeded out. So that is hopefully again what the governor considers as an option to the one that she is proposing right now, which is again just to pick one fiscal intermediary for the entire state. And I want to linger on this. The reason why I don't believe that that is the best idea, I don't think it's a good idea at all, actually, is because there are both geographic issues as well as cultural competency and language competency issues that would be incredibly difficult for one fiscal intermediary to be able to address. There are a lot of communities around the state that have fiscal intermediaries that correspond to their geographic area, to their language of preference, to their cultural competency of preference. And all of these things would actually be addressed with the bill that I put forward.
And lastly, what will be your strategy heading into the next legislative session to push the bill forward or work to provide further protections for New Yorkers enrolled in the CDPAP program?
Well, it'll be between now and the end of this year, it will be to get as many legislative sponsors, both in the Senate and the Assembly, as possible, have conversations with folks like yourselves in the media so that we can get this information out to New Yorkers so that they see what we're trying to do to make the program better and more effective on their behalf. And leading up to next year, certainly get the legislative leaders to push for this option to go to the floor of the Senate. But one thing at a time. For now, we've introduced it in the Senate just a few weeks ago. We will have an Assembly sponsor pretty soon. We're pushing to get as many of our colleagues, both from both branches and from both sides of the aisle, to become supporters, and then hopefully, be able to get the governor to engage with us to think about how more thoughtfully and more rationally and more reasonably to make these changes so that the program continues to exist, continues to provide service while the bad actors are weeded out of the system.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us today, Senator.
It's a pleasure to be with you.
And we were speaking with State Senator Gustavo Rivera, Chair of the Senate Health Committee. And for more information on that bill, you can visit our website. That's at nynow.org. Now turning to another topic. Under the 2019 Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, New York has goals and benchmarks in place to reduce gas emissions and to achieve zero-emission electricity in the next few years. But as of today, the state is not on track to meet those goals for a number of reasons. In this next segment, reporter Elise Klein dives into the state's approach to its environmental goals and the work ahead.
At a time when states across the nation face the impacts of climate change, New York is trying to reach several environmental goals they set for themselves back in 2019 to dramatically decrease greenhouse gas emissions. The Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, also called the Climate Act or the CLCPA, which passed in Albany in 2019, established goals to achieve zero-emission electricity by 2040 and reduce emissions by 85% below 1990 levels by 2050. Leading up to these big goals, the state also set smaller goals such as achieving 70% renewable energy and reducing greenhouse gas emissions by 40% from 1990 levels by 2030. Jeff Friedman, a research faculty member at the Atmospheric Sciences Research Center at SUNY Albany, says the state's goals are part of the solution to combating climate change.
I think they're laudable. I think this is the way to go. I think New York has always been a leader in this, and I'm happy to see this. And I think, I'm confident that we'll be able to meet these goals.
To achieve the goals set forth by the 2019 state law, the Climate Act created a Climate Action Council. The Climate Action Council is made up of climate experts, state agency representatives, and climate advocates. The 22 members were appointed by the governor and legislative leaders from the Assembly and the Senate. Robert Howarth, a professor of ecology and environmental biology at Cornell University, was appointed as a Climate Action Council member by the Assembly Speaker. He says the climate goals are aggressive but achievable.
The goals are required, really. The entire world has to move at least that quickly to decarbonize if we are to reduce the risk of runaway catastrophic global warming.
In December of 2021, the council drafted a scoping plan that outlines recommended policies and actions. The 445-page scoping plan was finalized a year later after holding 11 public hearings throughout the state. Doreen Harris, co-chair of the Climate Action Council, says the scoping plan is a roadmap.
In many ways, that scoping plan provided us with a framework to execute against, and certainly that's what we've been doing as a state.
The scoping plan is widely supported by climate experts and advocates. However, some advocates with the Environmental Justice Alliance say there are some things within the plan they do not support, such as allowing the consideration of a low-carbon fuel standard and calling it a false solution to clean air. The scoping plan's recommendations include regulations and programs to help the state achieve its emission reduction goals. The council is required to prepare and vote on a scoping plan every 5 years. They are also responsible for assembling advisory panels. One state program within the plan, called Cap and Invest, intends to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by putting an annual cap on the level of greenhouse gas pollution. John Binder, Deputy Commissioner for Climate Change, Air Resources, and Energy at the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation, says the program will provide a regulatory mechanism to ensure and enforce emission reduction.
There's a legal, regulatory, enforceable emissions cap that goes down every year. And so we will be having that cap go down on a trajectory that gets us towards that 40% by 2030 emission reduction requirement and the 85% by 2050 emission reduction requirement.
Binder says the Invest side of the program is also key to helping the state reduce emissions.
We auction what are called emission allowances. And emission allowances are essentially an approval to emit 1 ton of emissions. So the source that is subject to this program emits over the course of a year 100,000 tons of greenhouse gas emissions into the atmosphere. They also will have to obtain 100,000 of these emission allowances.
Binder adds the emission allowances could generate billions of dollars for the state.
And we can invest those proceeds in things to make sure that the program is implemented in an affordable manner so that we're not creating a burden on energy costs for consumers. But at the same time, we can also invest in things that help to further transition the economy to a clean energy economy.
The Cap and Invest program is one of many ways the state is trying to reach their goals. Another method is offshore wind turbines. As part of the state's goal to establish a zero-emission electricity system, there is a set goal to generate 9,000 megawatts of offshore wind power by 2035.
Offshore wind is one of these game-changing technologies for New York State. It has, first of all, the benefit of a massive ability to inject renewables into the New York City and Long Island region, where we have trouble siting other types of renewable energy. And its scale creates real opportunities to get after the decarbonization of our grid.
Rory Christian, chair of the Public Service Commission, agrees, saying offshore wind is a significant part of their progress.
Offshore wind can provide us with a significant amount of emissions-free resources to offset much of the combustion used for electric generation today. So I see it as a very critical aspect of our overall program.
Harris says NYSERDA continues to build the offshore wind pipeline through their offshore wind program. She highlighted 1 complete project in South Fork and 2 under construction, expected to be operational by 2026. Another method for the state to achieve its emission reduction goals is targeting the transportation and building sectors and moving them away from greenhouse gases. Harris says this process in particular is a big undertaking.
Buildings and transportation are actually the largest sources of greenhouse gas emissions in our state. And they're, in some ways, the most challenging to decarbonize because of the fact that we have 7 million households across our state. And fundamentally, there needs to be action in each one of those households to achieve these goals.
Harris says the good news is that there are readily available technologies like electric vehicles.
In the last 2 years alone, electric vehicle sales have increased by over 400% in New York State, well over 10% of sales as we speak. So that's a real inflection point that consumers are adopting these technologies ever more so.
While the state is making progress towards reaching its goals, many advocates and experts argue they are falling behind. While the state has met deadlines like establishing the scoping plan, it has missed several other deadlines to implement programs and regulations within that plan.
In the scoping plan in December 2022, we said that the Cap and Invest should be fully implemented by the end of 2023. Well, we're almost 2 years later, and They're still taking public input and discussing and debating, and I think that's extremely disappointing.
But Howarth says the biggest disappointment is the lack of progress to transition the state's building sector to renewable energy.
If we want to reach that 2030 goal of reducing statewide emissions by 40%, we have got to do that for the building sector, or else there's no way.
Advocates and climate experts aren't the only ones who are frustrated. Some Republican lawmakers say from day one there has been a lack of proper planning.
A goal is not a plan, and they've lacked a plan since day one with the CLCPA, which is exactly why they're not going to achieve any of these goals.
Some legislative leaders agree, saying it is simply impossible.
I don't see any way to say that this is achievable. So, I think the science and anyone that looks at this rationally would say the same thing.
Some Democratic members disagree. State Senator Pete Harcum says the Climate Act's goals are ambitious but achievable. He also stresses the importance of curbing greenhouse gas pollution as soon as possible. The Department of Environmental Conservation says they are working hard to implement programs and regulations, but the public input process is taking longer than expected.
In my couple of decades here at the agency, I've never seen this kind of intensive stakeholder outreach process for a regulatory program, and that's a good thing.
Other state agencies say several other challenges have delayed their progress, especially when it came to large new construction projects, including the pandemic, inflation, supply chain constraints, and interest rate challenges.
These are once-in-a-generational events individually, but collectively, they're paradigm shifts. So we have to look at the plans that we've made many years ago, understand how the reality of events today have affected those plans, and make adjustments accordingly.
Christian adds the agencies are working well together and they are moving ahead with speed to make up for lost time. Some environmental justice advocates argue while agencies are doing what they can, the governor's office has failed. Eunice Coe, deputy director at the New York City Environmental Justice Alliance, says state agencies need strong leadership to help shift the state to renewable energy.
On the executive side, we've seen a lack of urgency and leadership coming from Governor Hochul.
Paul DiMichele, a communications representative from the governor's office, responded, saying Governor Hochul has implemented some of the nation's strongest actions on climate, highlighting budgetary and policy measures to accelerate the pace of clean energy development. The governor also recently spoke at the state's annual Clean Energy Summit, which outlined the next steps to support the state's progress towards its emission reduction climate goals.
So we have a lot of responsibility on our shoulders. If you didn't feel it, I just put it on yours. It's heavy. It's heavy. But we will not fail the future. Failure is not an option. This is New York. We can figure this out.
The next steps outlined during the summit included advancing the state's agency actions towards supporting a zero-emissions electricity system and soliciting industry feedback on advanced nuclear technologies. Greg Lancette, president of the New York State Pipe Trades Association, who attended the climate summit, says nuclear technologies could be a good solution for alternative energy that could help the state catch up on its climate progress.
The new technology with the nuclear reactors, they're much smaller footprints of the traditional reactors that were built in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. So it's a small, compact solution that provides ample amounts of electricity and a very high reliability.
But some climate experts have reservations.
In the scoping plan, we debated nuclear power, and we really didn't see much of a role for new nuclear power because it's expensive and slow to deploy, and we can meet the goals more cheaply and more quickly with wind, solar, hydro, and appropriate storage.
While state agencies and state leaders discuss the option of nuclear power, some state lawmakers have a different solution to meet the climate goals: extend the deadline. Republican lawmakers in the Senate recently introduced a package of bills related to the state's climate goals. One bill would delay the Climate Act's mandates by 10 years.
I think the message is certainly from our conference and from our colleagues, Republicans in the Senate, has been very clear that we need to look at this, readdress it, and maybe slow down a bit and, again, bring reality back into the situation.
With a Democratic-led legislature, it's unclear if these bills will move forward without some level of support from Democratic lawmakers. And some Democratic lawmakers say while the government can extend a deadline, Mother Nature will not. Coe says the Environmental Justice Alliance plans to continue to push state leaders and lawmakers to comply with the Climate Act through organizing at public hearings, letter campaigns, and rallies. And while legislators await upcoming legislative session to hammer out policies around this issue, some climate experts say New Yorkers don't have to solely rely on the government to decide how and when to protect the environment.
you can't just say, oh, this politician is worried sufficiently for me, so I'm not going to worry about it. That doesn't work. It doesn't work that way. It's communities that really make these things work. And I think as a community, we need to have that kind of concern.
Friedman says there are a lot of ways individuals can reduce their carbon footprint, from purchasing an electric vehicle and using more energy efficient appliances to simply using less plastic. The plastics industry is currently responsible for 4 times more greenhouse gas emissions than the airline industry. So while reducing plastic pollution may seem minimal on an individual scale, it can still make a difference. Elise Klein, New York Now.
And for more information on the state's environmental goals, you can subscribe to our newsletter by going to newsletter.nynow.org or by scanning the QR code on your screen. Starting this week, we'll also have exclusive stories featured only in the newsletter that you don't want to miss. Well, that does it for this edition of New York Now. Thank you for tuning in, and see you next week.
Funding for New York Now is provided by WNET,